So here is the story, or at least the alleged story. Whether it ever happened, I wouldn't say, but the story is that two rabbis went to a small town to try out for the position of being rabbi. And the town didn't have very much money, so it put them up in the same room overnight. One of the rabbis talked in his sleep, and in his sleep, he gave his sermon. And he went the next day and gave the sermon again. So now it was fixed in the mind of the second rabbi, who got up and said, you know, I had my own sermon to give, but those words of my colleague were so wise, I think they deserve repeating. Repeated verbatim the sermon that he had now heard twice, and they were so impressed with his faculties of retention that they hired the second guy. Now, I mention this because there is something deeply Jewish about repetition. We are right now in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. In Hebrew, Devarim means words, but Deuteronomy, as you can hear, comes from duet, duo, second, because Deuteronomy is in large measure a recapitulation of the Torah. It's a way of saying, listen, if you weren't paying attention for the last year, let me tell you exactly what it is you missed. Now, there are new things in Deuteronomy, no doubt. But the idea is Moshe tells the people again, before they go into Israel, what it is that has happened. And this ethos of repetition accompanies us throughout our history. Shnayim Mikra v'achat Targum. 2 times you're supposed to read the Parsha, and once you're supposed to read it in the Aramaic translation. That was the gold standard for people throughout Jewish history until Rashi came along, and then you were supposed to do that as well. And according to the Maharal of Prague, the reason that you read it twice in the Hebrew and once in Aramaic, which was the vernacular, it's like reading it twice in Hebrew and once in English, is that in fact, the translation is in some ways more important on a higher level. And that's why when we talk about turning the Torah over and over, hafochva v'hafochva d'chulei, we say it in Aramaic. Because the height of repetition is to do it so many times that it becomes almost second nature. Why? Why do we repeat things again and again? Well, the first reason is because we forget. By the time I have gotten this far in the sermon, you probably already forgot the story about the 2 rabbis who were trying out for the position. So let me remind you, I'll repeat it. There were 2 rabbis, no, I won't. But you get the idea. I have heard that by the time someone walks out of a speech or a sermon, they have forgotten half of what it is that was said. And therefore, the skillful preacher will repeat and repeat the critical points so they will not be forgotten. Well, you can imagine with something as voluminous as the Torah, how much we forget. And in fact, when we revisit verses every year, we see new things because we just forgot about them. And even if they are the same, we are different. And therefore, the wisdom has to run through a different filter and come out hopefully deeper, more nuanced, more rooted in who we are. But the other reason we repeat is because every repetition gives you a slightly different take. I read once in reading about Freud and Freud's interpretations of dreams that in fact, Freud was less interested specifically in the content of the dream than in the way in which it would change when the person who had the dream would retell it. Because they would never tell the dream exactly the same way twice. And those changes, that is, what gets lost and what gets repeated and what gets added, that told him the deeper significance of the dream to the person who was recounting it. And so when Moshe in Deuteronomy repeats what has happened, he changes things. He remembers God getting angry, not only at him, but at others at times when we didn't know. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, God said at the end of Moses says at the end of the golden calf that God was tremendously angry with Aharon. We don't know that in the book of Exodus. We hear that in Deuteronomy. The Ten Commandments have a slightly different valence in the two. Remember, Zachor v'Shamor b'dibur echad. In one place it says that you should Zachor, remember the Shabbat, and in another place it says you should Shamor, guide the Shabbat. Guard, rather, the Shabbat. Remember and guard are somewhat different. And so we repeat to learn more and more and more. We are about to come up to Rosh Hashanah. And once again, we will be repeating the prayers that we said last year and the year before and the year before. But they will be different. They will not be the same. Because even though we will recite prayers like Mi Yichyeh Umi Yamut, who will live and who will die, we hear it differently this year. Given everything we have gone through, experienced, suffered, and endured. So why do we repeat the Torah again and again and again? Because each repetition is both a fixing in our mind and a learning of something new. We read the Torah when we are young to find out what will happen to us. We read the Torah when we are old to explain what has happened to us. The Torah has the same words, but we are not the same readers. And as we approach this circle of the year, once again, as we repeat yet again, remember that every repetition is not only a circle, but a spiral that we use to grow higher and higher and higher in spiritual, emotional, and intellectual understanding of who we are and what it is God wants of us. So, let us begin again. Shabbat Shalom.